Okay. Good morning. My name is Rick Delmonte, and I'm one of the two speakers. I'm a principal at R&B Architecture. I'm a lecturer at Clemson University, professional practice and studio next semester, and current chair of the BIMForum Board of Directors, as well as a Board of Director member for the DBIA. I come with a kind of unique perspective. Up to a year ago, I was the chief design officer for Beck, billion-dollar construction firm. I merged with my partners, an architecture firm in '99, creating an integrated company. So I've had the privilege of seeing things both from the architecture side and from the construction side as a business. And here joining me is Jim Bedrick. Jim?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I'm like Rick, I'm an architect by trade, but I've worked for all three sides of the industry. I practiced architecture for a while. I worked the facilities management and construction and capital projects division of a major tech company. Then for 10 years, I was at Webcor Builders, a major construction company in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was a vice president there and built their virtual design and construction program. I've been since 2011, I've been out on my own, leveraging that round trip in the industry to support collaboration. And I've done that from a number of different directions. I was one of the founders of the IPD movement. I was one of the inventors of the LOD framework and currently chair of the committee, BIMForum LOD Spec Committee. I was on the AIA Documents Committee for about 13 years, where I worked on everything from the BIM documents to the general conditions of the construction contract. And I am currently a member of the BIMForum Board of Directors. Rick?
Next slide, I think, Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's still mine. So this is approved for one learning unit, one elected learning unit for AIA continuing ed. So if you want the credit, please put your name and your AIM number in the chat, and we'll take care of getting you registered. For other continuing ed credits for other organizations, you can self-report this, and I'm sure it will fly. So the learning objectives this morning, we do want to be able to explain how risk avoidance limits the architectural role in the VDC process. And this is probably the biggest point of the presentation this morning. We want to understand what executives and modelers need to learn from each other, what they don't know about the other's perspectives and what they need to know. We need to understand the current standard of care in a collaborative building process and how that works. And we also want to understand how financial incentives for all team members can improve the outcomes.
Okay.
So there's yours, Rick.
Yeah. So the big questions we're going to issue is really, what do we want? What have we got? Why aren't we there? And how can we get there? This came from a lot of discussion about what is the potential for the technology that we have right now. BIM, laser scanning, all the other things that we've got has a tremendous potential, but we really aren't achieving it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm basing this a lot, not only on what I've done as an architect, but also it was interesting to work at a large construction firm, which worked with other architects. So I got a chance to see in a generally CM at risk kind of environment, how architects, what they take responsibility for, what they don't do. And so with that, we're going to discuss really, why aren't we there? Why aren't we accomplishing the technology? What are the reasons? And then talk about how we can get there, here from there, there from here. Anyway, and I'm not going to tell you that I have the answers, but maybe a few suggestions and something to think about as we move forward.
Okay, great. And a couple things to mention. One, this is the first of a three-part series on this question of the business of architecture and how it impacts the BIM process and the BIM use. So there will be two more. Stay tuned at the BIMForum website for that. Also, During the presentation this morning, we hope to generate some conversation. So please jump in, put your questions in the question window or in the chat. Janice, if you'll moderate, that would be great. But we can take questions during the middle of the presentation, and then we'll have some time left over at the end for some discussion.
Okay.
So the first piece of what do we want? We do want a model that is shared by all team members. Okay, we want the model transitioning from the architect to the builder, and the builder adding detail rather than starting over. Owners often balk at this practice of the architect or the builder starting from scratch to do a model when he's already paid the architect to do the model. But current modeling practices make that necessary in most cases. The thing is that if the elements, if the right elements in the architect's model have a high enough level of development, that model can transition to the contractor, because the contractor often needs, for most elements, the contractor needs the same level of development that the CDs give. They will add, raise some of the elements to higher levels, but the bulk of the work will already be done.
Yeah, and Jim, the one thing I would say is, at Beckwar, we did not have legal issues, right? It's one firm, total liability. The ability for the architects to begin drawing, the VDC team to jump on very quickly to check that the model was being built to the standards required for what it was needed for, and to again move back and forth between the two groups without worrying about who drew what or what liability was. I think that is a very productive way, and one that I think would be an ideal for us to achieve as an industry.
Yeah, it's a good point, Rick. In a vertically integrated company like yours, it works well. And part of the thing is that if it works there, why can't we make it work in less collaborative processes? I mean, the functionality is there. And one of the things that's coming down the pike here is the idea of a model as a contract. Right now, what we do is generate 2D drawings from a model, and those are the contract. But it's been recognized in the industry that it's a much more efficient method to use the model itself as a contract. And if the model is prepared and conditioned right, that can be done. In fact, the AIA BIM documents that were released last July set the stage for that. They do allow a model to become a contract and put in the protections that are needed where risk needs to be apportioned appropriately.
Like I said, we already touched on what would we like the architect doing, design coordination, the builder detail coordination. For me, design coordination is just like it's been traditionally done. As an architect, if your floor structure is 2 feet deep and your ducts are 2 feet deep, then you know your overall plenum is going to have to be from 4 foot 6 inches, 4 foot 9 inches, and you do in general know that what you're drawing is going to be achievable. This is important not just for coordination, but so that you can achieve design intent. I've seen architects that pass models along, and during the construction documents have a note that says all coordination above the ceiling is the responsibility of the contractor, and do no coordination above the ceiling. So I think basic coordination to me fits within our standard of care. Detailed coordination, for example, if the builder comes in and realize, okay, we've got to have flanges, we have to have service access to this equipment, we're going to have to do some modifications, that fine tuning is to be expected. And that's where the builder and the subcontractor come in and add that. But I think the architect doing the basic coordination is important. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, that's a question that often pops up, is what is the difference between design coordination and construction coordination? The construction coordination, of course, has to be detailed enough that it's actually buildable. What I usually think of as design coordination is that we're pretty confident that the stuff will fit in the plenum and the shafts. So the idea of leaving 3 inches to coordinate the MEP system doesn't make sense. We also want the ability to use the model for a wide range of uses. And this supports design decisions and supports the construction process. And especially in its support of the design decisions, it can lead to a much better design. Of course, there's the coordination issue, and you need an adequate level of development of the elements to make that possible. Cost control is a big issue. In using setting up the model right, that it will give you quantities of major elements. You can do many more estimates during the design process than is usually done. If you have to do a full-on quantity takeoff and estimate at every cost check, that's a lot of work. But it can be set up at the beginning so that that cost check is to a large extent automatic, and that lets you do course changes, course corrections of the design, rather than having to do what we disingenuously call value engineering, which really means we went over budget, and so we're going to have to rip out scope and quality to get back down. Of course, everyone's familiar with that modular construction, design for manufacturing and assembly, is a big thing that's coming down the pipe. That obviously the models need to be set up right in order to accommodate that. Sustainability, not only things like energy use and lighting and daylighting and that sort of thing, but also material tracking, or for example, LEED credits that deal with local materials and recycled materials and so on. So you can track those kinds of materials during the design and wind up with a design that will achieve the LEED rating. We also want a complete as-built for the owner, suitable for facilities ops. Okay, the owners nowadays, a lot of owners ask for the model and then don't use it, but more and more are. There are apps like Maximo and so on that will induct a Revit model, for example, and turn it to use for the for facilities management. This idea of a digital twin is becoming a big buzzword, but it actually is a thing. And a lot of owners, really savvy owners, are asking for it. And this is where the model of the building, in essence, becomes an interface for operating the building, monitoring things like indoor air quality, safety and security, maintenance. There's of course, most building operators realize that scheduled maintenance is a hugely important issue and needs to be tracked and very visible. And also now there's coming the idea of predictive maintenance, which is basically monitoring the performance of various equipment elements like vibration, current draw, and that sort of thing, and getting early warnings that something's going out before it goes out and you have to repair it.
Let me put this down a second. And then, you know, each party contributing to the success of the project when we're working on this, and each party making a fair profit. I think that one of the things that, you know, we're going to come to is there the fee, is there the time to be able to contribute? But I think at the end of the job, if one party makes a lot of money and the other party is just breaking even, I don't think that's a very successful project.
Currently, the prevalent practice, even in very BIM savvy firms, is to build models only for the generation of 2D drawings. So what happens is we have a nice model here, but then we extract information, take views of it that make 2D drawings, and then do line work on them and so on. And a model that is good enough for 2D drawings is liable to get you something like this, that the elevator machine on the floor looks fine in 2D, but if you try to use this model for coordination, it's not going to work. Something like this, where the columns aren't connected. Okay. Again, it'll look fine in 2D, but it's not really useful for coordination. The funny thing is that really what happens is the architect imagines the building in 3D, squashes it down to 2D, and then the builder takes that 2D and builds it back up into 3D. Seems like a little bit of an inefficient process.
Yeah. You know what we would see, Jim, often in models is that if you're only using it for 2D drawings, and you only really have to add the information required for that. So we would get models where they would have simply every wall stopped at the ceiling line, didn't go to structure. So it wouldn't have the actual amount, which walls go to structure, which walls go to ceiling. You wouldn't slope the structure at the top floor where you had to drain. There were just a whole variety of items that if you're doing 2D drawings, you don't need. But if you're going to do any sort of cost, scheduling, and coordination are important items. And so those are the things that we typically see left out when you're looking at something for a 2D production rather than looking at it as a 3D tool that you're going to use for the whole construction process.
So you wind up missing a lot of the potential benefit of the model that you put a lot of effort into.
And then basically architects and insurers really unwilling to take responsibility for the model. And I'm sure there are architects that are not doing this, doesn't apply to everybody, but I have to say that, you know, probably 95% of the firms that I saw working at Beck in design had, you know, what, a 20-page document that you had to sign, basically saying that they took no responsibility for the model. And I guess in some way it sort of makes sense, because if you are legally bound, if the 2D documents are the legal contractual element, then you don't want to be held responsible for both the 2D drawings and the 3D model. But we'll talk about this. I think we have to find a way in which architects can take responsibility for the model without taking excessive risks, that there's some way that we work together in terms of figuring out how to do that and how to work together, create a model that really becomes the basis for the construction.
Yeah, the standard practice of putting that disclaimer with a model basically says, I mean, we know that there's a lot of unreliable information in the model, a lot of approximations and so on. That's legitimate. But these disclaimers say that basically because some of the information in the model is not reliable, don't rely on any of it. So that does seem to be a big case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. Okay.
So established practice methods currently are reinforced by industry contracts. You have several organizations, including AIA contract documents, the Design Build Institute of America, and Engineers Joint Contract Documents Committee, among others, that publish documents that are used by the industry. And these have kind of baked into them these issues that Rick and I have been talking about. One of the issues is that designers are really almost prohibited from getting into means and methods, all right, which doesn't really make much sense, because if you're designing something, it's going to have to be built, and you need to at least consider them. And the standard of care is actually changing. Now, standard of care is kind of an amorphous thing that changes all the time. I think it's usually defined as what a reasonably prudent professional in the same situation would do. Pretty hard to define precisely, but that's what it is and it's considered by the law. And what happens is that as the industry changes, the standard of care changes. All right. But one of the things that's happened is with the advent of BIM, if you Google first BIM lawsuit, you'll still find this article on the first page article by Nadine Post that was done in 2011. What happened here was that the architect and engineers designed the MEP system in a manner that would fit. It was very tight fit in the space available, but it would fit. But it had to be put in a specific sequence in order to work. Well, they didn't communicate that specific sequence to the contractor. The contractor started putting it in what he thought was the normal sequence, and of course, about 70% of the way through, he found now can't get what was necessary into the space. Now, you might think that that sequence was means and method, and so therefore it was no responsibility of the designers. But in fact, the architect and engineers got hit with some of the penalty as well. So the judgment came against the architect and engineers as well as the contractor and the sub. Everybody wound up eating some of the cost of this. So, you know, there's been a question for some time as, you know, we have available the tools to do 3D coordination. If you don't do 3D coordination, are you actually meeting the standard of care? And that is actually a current question.
Yeah. So Jim, if you go back, we did get a comment from Arlen saying that in getting the BIM model level required for the contractor to take it, covered to some extent in the updated AIA A133-2019 owner construction manager agreement. I'm not familiar with that one, but like I said, if we are setting up, you know, if we are adjusting the contract documents to allow for that, that would be a significant step forward.
Yeah, was that Arlen Solacek? Is he on the?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Hi, Arlen. I worked with Arlen for years on the AIA documents committee, and we worked together on several documents. But one of the things that's happening is this whole idea of level of development that defines reliability of elements, and that is also baked in not only into the CM agreements that Arlen and I both worked on, but that was some years ago, so I don't recall the details. But more recently, we worked on the BIM documents, and those lay out the element by element, the reliability of elements in the model. So there is now contractual language and contractual processes that do lay out the reliability of these models and actually lay them out in a manner like we were talking about before, that they can actually become contracts.
Okay.
Rick?
So what have we got?
I'm sorry, this is mine. I apologize.
All right.
So we really have a lack of innovation in the industry right now, and what has happened a lot is that we have kind of paved the cow paths. We used to drive nails with a hammer, and now we drive them with a nail gun, but we're still driving nails. We still lay bricks by hand, but really advanced innovation. They're being laid by robots, but we're still laying bricks. So the problem here is that we're really not doing any kind of really disruptive or really advanced revolutionary innovation. It's more incremental innovation. There is some of the things are happening, like 3D printing, that sort of thing, real innovation, but it's very slow to take on in this industry.
So what we've got now is, I think that the builders have come in and they built up these VDC teams. They're taking the slack and really taking significant responsibility for the coordination. Again, I see, other architects working with our team, and the architects typically don't get involved in the coordination, don't come when they're doing the, clash detection, all those sort of elements. And, that concerns me, because I see when I look at these, an owner's experience, the builder rebuilding the model from scratch, doing all the coordination, the architect having very little involvement in that portion of it. I know that I've heard owners say things like, well, I'm not sure why we're paying the architect for production on this job, because it seems like it's the builder that's actually doing most of the drawing. We're using their model. And so again, I worry as an architect, it concerns me that we are giving up a certain amount of responsibility, and we're giving up a certain amount of standing in the profession. And I don't think it's healthy. I also think that as architects, these VDC teams typically aren't registered architects, and taking responsibility for everything from code, fire, all the other elements that as a professional architect you watch over. It scares me a little bit, because I've had people, you know, even at Beck, that were saying, well, this VDC team's so great, why don't you architects just do the SketchUp model and we'll pass it on to the VDC team from there? It's like, no, stop. There are all kinds of code and legal and other issues that you're specifically trained and licensed for that a computer person doing coordination cannot do. So again, I think that it hurts, and I hope that we don't just give up more of our responsibility like we have in the past for other areas. And again, this is the final one. Again, our architects being marginalized for this. I worked in Brazil. I spent a lot of years working in Korea. And when you meet architects in that area, most of them have never been to a job site. They typically finish the drawings, hand it off. There's a CM that oversees the contractor, and they generally don't get involved beyond that. And I think it really damages the quality of the work, the quality of the design. And I would hate to see that happening, because I think that, you know, that's not a great model.
So why haven't we gotten there, right? One of the biggest issues is fee pressure. The fees keep getting squashed down, and you know, so we have less and less time to actually accomplish things. And you know, it was I had an interesting conversation with somebody at the beginning, kind of when we were starting out with IPD, and this person was incensed at the idea that he would do a better job if he was paid more. This is a nice romantic notion, but the fact of the matter is that if you don't have the fee, how are you going to put in the extra effort and keep the doors open in the firm? I remember years ago, a guy that I was working for said, look, good design is an expense. And I was a young idealistic architect. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really a kind of a bad way of looking at things. But the fact of the matter is, in the current climate, the current processes, where the architect is given a fee, a lump sum fee, and then has to do the design within that fee, the fact of the matter is that design work is an expense. The more design work that is put into that project, the less profit the firm is going to make.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny. So I teach professional practice, and you get all these young architects. And the thing that I tell them is, look, when you get fees, you get a lump sum. And every hour you spend, you're taking away from that lump sum, and you're leaving yourself less and less money. And therefore, you have very little incentive to go beyond just basic services, to go do more coordination, to spend more time doing clash detection, do all these other things that I think add value to the project. So how we get beyond that. And now I'll say that most architects want to do a good job. And I think it's because of our nature of wanting to do better work that we continue to draw and do whatever we need to do a successful job. But I really think that it would be better if we had a fee incentive to continue to do, you know, a better project and have a better result for the owner and for the builder. And then, you know, risk aversion. You know, when you work in a construction firm, you know, construction firms are very good at pricing risk. For a construction firm, risk is a business decision. And so I sat in on, again, as managing director, we would we would review certain projects, and there was risk in those projects, and we would price it. We would say, you know what, I think we could take that risk. The owner wants us, for example, take responsibility for unknown underground conditions. if we get at least a percentage of fee this high and plus that, I think we would be willing to take that risk. So I think that that notion, the ability to look at it in a business sense of what we do with risk, is one the contractors are quite good at. Now, I will say they have a lot more capital behind them and, you know, more ability to take risk. But I think rather than just saying, no, I'm not taking any risk, I don't want to share this model, I think it would be really good to figure out if there aren't better ways to allocate the risk and find a way to be able to do some of these things that we can't do right now.
It's been an effort for quite a while. I mean, the theory is to allocate the risk to whoever is best to control it. But it does seem that risk keeps getting, everyone tries to push it off. And so architects for decades now have been shedding risk and in the same time shedding fees.
And then again, a lack of a reward structure. When you look at it, and you know, if you do even design build, even some collaborative processes, the architect begins again with a lump sum that he kind of pulls money out of as he works. The contractor has a lot of different ways to make money. I mean, let's face it, they've got, number one, you've got your base fees. Generally, you're making profit off your insurance company. There's so-called self-perform work, which can be a little fishy sometimes, but you can make a lot of money on self-perform work, equipment rental. So there's a whole lot of things. And then plus any cost savings generally are shared between the owner and the builder. So a builder has a lot of reward, a lot of incentive to make a better process, to be more efficient, to come in with other tools. The architect without some sort of a reward structure doesn't have that. IPD did a really good job, I think, of trying to create that sort of reward structure. And I've seen in a couple of IPD projects, some really creative ways to do that for extra effort. I mean, I think there were scorecards involved. There were a lot of factors to determine what the compensation would be. But it definitely changed the discussion when you put those kind of things into place, rather than just leaving this one structure and only allowing one party actually to really, you know, get rewarded for more efficient process.
So we talked a little bit about innovation before, and 3D printing being one of the real revolutionary innovations that has happened. But the fact of the matter is there's a lack of resources and there's a low reward to risk ratio for innovation in the industry. There's a thin profit margin. Okay, the general contractor is lucky to get 2%. So, you know, how can you put money aside to innovate, given that kind of a margin? The fact is that one project going south can sink an architecture or construction firm. So if you look at other, you know, general manufacturing companies like an automobile company or somebody like Johnson & Johnson that has a lot of products out there, they can have one or two products completely fail and they're fine. They can continue on. So architects and contractors are very, very reluctant to try something new. They'd rather go with the devil they know than try something new that could be a lot better, because they know with the devil they know they can at least keep food on the table.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jim, it's interesting. I did an executive course at Stanford where we went through and analyzed profit and everything else, and they try to advise you. When I was presenting the profitability of a construction company, it's roughly 2%. They were shocked. They're saying, you know, 2% is a commodity thing, like you're selling bananas. Given the risks that you take as a builder, that seems ridiculous. I mean, and think about this. If you do $100 million in volume, at the end of the day, you get a $2 million profit. And so the ability to invest for anything but the largest firms is, like I said, very limited. And that's concerning because I think there are other players outside, we'll talk about at the end, that have the resources to invest. And again, could put us, you know, in the industry at a competitive disadvantage. Sorry.
Yeah, but one interesting thing that is happening in the industry these days is that there are a lot of forward-thinking construction companies that are seeing that there is some value in innovation and are investing in it. And there are actually a lot of companies now have director level and even executive level positions that are really dedicated to innovation and finding new innovations that could be profitable for the company. One of the reasons that there's this disconnect is that there's a lack of understanding by senior executives who make the business decisions. There's a lack of understanding there of BIM and its risks, right? Okay, so modelers in general understand modeling. They know what they can do. They know how long it's going to take them. Sometimes they sometimes take on more, do more than is needed, but they understand the ins and outs of modeling and what's needed to do it. The execs, on the other hand, they understand the business issues. What are the risks of a project? The profit that we can make. Do we want like Rick just outlined a little bit before? How do we evaluate whether a project is going to be profitable for us or not? The problem is that there's this big divide between these two. Very few people in the industry understand both sides. I mentioned that I worked on the AIA Contract Documents Committee for 13 years. And one of the things that came out when we were working on the BIM documents was the AIA puts out something like 260 plus documents and forms. Every one of them is understood by the execs and the legal people, except the BIM documents. So there is a big divide between the two. And the problem that leads to is that the modelers, they understand modeling, they understand the processes, they understand the deliverables they have to create, they understand the supporting infrastructure they need. The execs, they understand the business issues, fee, staff commitment, risk, and so on. But these impact each other. And when the two don't know, when one side doesn't know what the other side is doing, you get conflicting expectations, you get overcommitment, and you get unanticipated risks. So the problem here, the obvious solution is education, but it needs to be recognized that the need to know is there, that the execs can't keep their hands, off the modeling, and the modelers, even though they're brand new people, maybe straight out of school, they need to start learning something about the business issues and the risk that they're taking on when they model something.
So what can we do to improve it? And I'm just going to make some suggestions. Number one, I think collaborative delivery models, design, build, integrated project delivery, or even integrated firms go a long way towards creating a structure to help solve this issue. Though I will say that having been involved again with the DBIA a long time and talking to practitioners, I think it still faces the same issues. You still have tremendous fee pressure at the beginning of the projects. You also have the issue of very few examples that I could find of anybody sharing fees or finding some way to share the rewards of this thing across the project team. But I think there's something about the collaborative process and joining together that will help. IPD, as I look back on it, and Jim, you were involved, I think there were just a lot of really good things about the IPD process. I think the risk, the notion that you were going to, form this little group in which everybody agreed not to sue each other made it very difficult for a lot of owners to participate in that sort of a process. But that doesn't mean that the fee sharing and other ideals that came out of that process weren't quite good. And again, in the DBIA board, I've been arguing for a while that we need to incorporate some of those concepts into it, because I think they would help to motivate teams and everything else. And then finally, integrated firms. We merged an architecture and construction firm in 1999, and we thought, wow, we've got 3 or 4 years before lots of people start doing this. Well, I don't know anybody that followed us. This is 24 years later, and I still haven't seen very many announcements of any significant firms that are integrating. But ideally, if you could get it together where the bottom line of everybody involved in the project was a common bottom line, I think you could motivate people to behave differently than we do now. And clearly, if you can erase the legal issues between the teams, i.e. the information can flow back and forth, then you eliminate all this discussion about blockchain and how do you lock your model, and so you know nobody's touched it or whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic here, that the principle behind that idea that nobody could sue each other when we were developing IPD was that, well, if something goes wrong, there's nothing left to do but fix it. Doesn't matter. You can point your finger at somebody, blame somebody. It doesn't matter. Even if they really are at fault, you still have to fix it. And the thing is that often, you know, if there's a problem with the HVAC system or something, the solution might be in the structural system. So people getting together to solve these problems is really highly beneficial to the firms. So I think, you know, we have to, like Rick says, we've got to get some of these principles implemented, or more of the principles implemented, and in a way that's digestible for the owners. I mean, the owners are still very reluctant to sign an agreement that says they can't sue the people. So more creative ways then to share these rewards is necessary. And obviously, you know, we've got IPD, that was a really good way of sharing the rewards. Something that was done earlier and is much simpler is a GMP with shared savings that contractors often do, where they will base the contract on a guaranteed maximum price, and then if they come under that, they will the owner will share some of the savings with the contractor, so they have a good incentive to come under the save the owner money. Good incentive for that. But okay, so that's in the construction end. But I was talking with a CEO who was fairly traditional of a big construction firm, just as we were starting to think about IPD, and he said, you know, I would be glad to share some of that the cut of the savings with the architect, because he knew that the architect could save him a lot of money at the design end. So there are a number of ways of doing that, and I think we need to come up with more ways of sharing these rewards that are palatable to everyone on the project.
I think a better model for sharing risk between the builder and the architect. Again, you know, I talked a little bit about how builders generally can price risk and see this as a business decision. I think things like, for example, if you're going into a CM or design build relationship with a builder, discussions about what's my design contingency. You know, if there are issues in this model, I don't want to be sued for the first time that two things don't coordinate and there's a $50,000 problem. If there's a design contingency and you say, you know, anything less than 2% of the construction cost that is lack of coordination or problems with the model, you don't have to pay whatever. I think that we need to come up with terms that aren't quite as ambitious as the ones that IPD did, where, okay, we all agree we're not going to sue each other, but under what parameters are we not going to sue each other? Do we agree that if we meet this level of performance, we won't, and we can share the model with confidence, knowing that in general we'll be protected? So I don't know. I think we just need to be more creative in the way that we do this and come up with some different models. Okay. Okay, next one, Jim.
Yeah, are you seeing the risk as a business decision?
Didn't we just do that?
Nope, we did this one. I think, yeah, remember you and I had the discussion about actually evaluating that the risk.
Yeah, you know, it is interesting because, again, in terms of builders, there were times when we would be forced to take consequential damages, and other firms were taking consequential damages. So we're thinking, okay, how do we deal with that? Of course, consequential damages are the consequences of something going wrong. You don't just pay for the building problems, you pay for the business issues. If you don't open a mall by Christmas, you're responsible for all the lost income of all those stores. And what we were finding out is that builders were creating other companies that had no assets. So if you wanted to, I don't know, I'll use Turner, though I don't know, I shouldn't use Turner. Let's say ABC contractors, they have their capital in the company. If they wanted to do a risky project, they would create another company. You know, ABC contractors, real estate, whatever it may be. And so I think that there are, you know, creative ways of thinking about how do we work around these things? How do we mitigate the risk so that we don't end up going out of business on some of these things?
Yeah, and the fact is, it's a risky industry. I mean, the possibility of going, blowing the schedule by a week or so is pretty real. But if you've got the consequential damages of a mall at Christmas, like Rick is talking about, the consequential damages could be huge. In the AIA, we always put in the contracts that a waiver of consequential damages, but that clause is often struck by owners as they negotiate the contract.
Okay. And so, you know, this is the last one. So as we look at the industry and we look at how do we need to work together to make it more efficient, what happens if we don't? I mean, I'm sure most of you have seen the McKinsey report that really talked about the inefficiency in our industry. They were saying something in the neighborhood of 30%, a third waste that happens. That seems like a lot, but what's happened is that has focused a lot of venture capital firms and investors in trying to figure out where these inefficiencies are. Because if you can figure out and you can solve this inefficiency, there's huge amounts of money to be made. We know it's not going to be easy. I think most of us have seen Katerra, depending on who you talk to, they invested anywhere from $3 to $5 billion in changing this industry. Again, working on at the source of, you know, creating the wood beams, doing all this stuff, all this tremendous investment, and they basically didn't make it. They went under basically when firms stopped giving them any more venture capital. So we know that even $5 billion it's not enough to make major changes. But I think there's going to be outsiders that have a lot deeper pockets than somebody like Katerra. And I think if we don't solve our own issues, I think somebody else will. I think Amazon, Walmart, Google, Intel, people that have building programs of billions of dollars a year, I think at some point are going to say, you know what, let's just start at the basics, at the low level. What if we built our own warehouses? What if we kind of streamline the process for doing, you know, distribution centers, whatever. And if they get that solved, then they have the ability to begin moving up market little by little and, you know, taking over this industry. Because the reality is that when you look at revolution in different industries, most of the major revolutions don't happen from insiders. It's people coming in from the outside and making tremendous changes. If you look at electric cars and you look at the companies that are trying to run both gasoline engines as well as they're trying to develop electric engines and the issues that they're having, and then you look at an outsider that just stepped in out of nowhere like Tesla, who is absolutely focused on just one thing and the efficiencies they're able to solve, you can see what can happen here. So I'm hoping that our profession steps up, that somehow we figure out a way that we can work with builders so we can be more efficient. Certainly the technology is there, but I think, again, the current structure is the thing that's keeping us from achieving what we could achieve with this technology.
I think an interesting point on this slide here, Rick, is this second one about venture capital firms thriving on finding inefficiencies. Well, why can't we find the inefficiencies? You know, we're supposed to be the experts in design and construction. Why can't we find the inefficiencies? And part of it is that we talk to each other, we talk to ourselves a lot rather than looking outside the industry. I was involved with the center. It was the Center for Innovation in the Design and Construction Industry. At the time, it is now the Center for Innovation. It's something that you might want to Google it and take a look at some of the webinars they have and so on. One of the things that we started when we founded it was that we consciously looked outside the construction industry for some of the input to conferences and webinars, because we realize that this, we talk about how our industry is so inefficient, and then we go to conferences and talk to ourselves. So we really do need to open up and look at what other industries are doing, and that will help us find these inefficiencies, and then we can profit by fixing them.
Yeah. The challenge, I remember when, technology was coming over, there was a saying as far as trying to transform your company into a digital company, whatever, and that is that you need to be willing to cut off your arm before somebody comes in and cuts off your head. And and that's the reality of this business, right? We have legacy businesses, we have people, it's very difficult to change, very difficult to get rid of old processes, old businesses that may not fit. These new people coming in don't have any of that baggage. They're not having to cut off their arms, they're just coming in straight in. So yeah, I think they're very difficult decisions. I don't want to underplay them. But I think, again, working together would be one of the first steps towards getting a little bit closer to that. And I'll say the next seminar we got in April is going to be Brian Skripak, and who is the director of VDC for DBIA, as well as Alex, who's leads the VDC effort at McCarthy Construction. And they're going to be talking about their experiences with VDC in the field, what they're seeing, what the reality is. We've been presenting at a very high level. And then the last seminar we're going to do is going to be in April, and it's going to involve owners. What do they see in the situation? How do they feel about the architect, builder, who does what's their experience? I'm still trying to find the right owners, but I think that's going to also be a good one. So thank you. I think we're open for questions now.
Janice, do we have any?
I think Rick and Jim both addressed Arlen's comments. I don't see any other questions coming in. Please enter your comments or questions into the chat window.
Yeah. Please feel free to disagree.
Yes, please. I mean, we threw out a lot of stuff there that was opinions and observations, and other people are liable to have very different observations and opinions. So in order to solve these problems, we really need to look at it from just about every viewpoint we can figure. So I see a comment here. I feel like Rip Van Winkle, but nothing has changed. It's depressing. Yes. And that was basically the thesis of this whole presentation was, we've got all these opportunities. Why hasn't it changed? So we really do need to start thinking differently in order to so that Rip Van Winkle can wake up and see something different.
Yeah, the other thing, one of the comments there about scaling innovation, I know that one of the frustrations I've had at Beck, and I've seen it even in owners, is that you may get somebody that's particularly creative, comes into a firm, begins really changing things, adding innovation, and then what ends up happening is if that person leaves, the whole innovation collapses. The challenge is, once you get some innovation started, is how to begin scaling it at a larger enterprise level so you can keep going. And that, I think, is why we see a lot of firms that have up and down steps. And the other one is that I see all of these people showing incredible VDC processes, and I know the companies. I'm thinking, okay, you did this on one project, but that's the model project. It isn't something that's typical.
I see someone made the comment here. Look at what the steel industry has done. Can you elaborate on that? What in particular are you talking about for the steel industry?
Well, if I was going to say the model of the steel industry that I remember, there may be a newer one, but basically it was when you had the old legacy manufacturers and you had people like Nucor that came in building mini mills and recycling steel, and they could do it cheaper. So they began recycling the steel, and they started with rebar because that was the lowest cost product, and then gradually began moving up in the industry and little by little running most of the big manufacturers out of business. So again, a startup that came in and took on the legacy steel companies.
I see another comment here. Problem I see is the design record model not matching the trades model, and neither side wanting to take the liability to combine both into one. And I think it's not just the liability, they don't want to take the time. I know a lot of architects balk at the idea of updating their design model with every change order and RFI, but someone is going to produce that model that is the building as it winds up being handed over to the owner. So it needs to be done somewhere, and someone needs to have the, again, we've got this fee pressure, someone needs to have the fee to be able to do it.
Yeah. Comment about owners need to start changing their, oh, you just clicked it. Contracts and delivery requirements. Yes, I agree. Yes. Joshua, I also agree with your comment. Just like I was saying, the challenge really is to scale up the innovations in the builders, where they have certain projects that they can put the innovations in, but scaling it throughout the organization is very difficult to do.
Yeah, that's really a good point, that when someone leaves and the innovation fails, the innovation needs to be more than just one person, one champion driving it. We do find that a lot. There's something's going on in a company, and the champion leaves and the effort falls flat. So, you know, I think one of the points of that is that if you do start innovating in a company, you need to make sure that the innovation goes way beyond just the innovators.
Yeah. Architects should change their fee schedules, more fees up front, less in CDs, abandon the attitude that we will work everything out in CDs. Well, I agree. You know, the only thing that I would point out, though, is that even in a collaborative process, the fee schedule for architects is typically front loaded. So I think the AIA has 25% for CA. And I think one of the problems is that we look back historically in a collaborative process, how much we were spending, and our average CA time was around 40% of the fee. So you can push more money up front, but all I'll say is you better leave enough money to cover your CA time. And I think this is one of the reasons why architects don't do as much CA as they should, or get into trouble during the CA process.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Rick, is that if people consciously leave to CA what they could do in the design phase, I think that's where the problem comes in. There's a lot of stuff that will change, and you get more information as the building is built, and so better decisions become apparent, and so on. So a lot of the stuff is legitimately left to CA, but the problem is that many architects will, it's kind of like that, you know, not taking responsibility for the coordination issue, that there are things that they could work out in the design phase, but they say, oh no, we'll take care of that in CA.
Yeah, I know, good comments. Yeah, I agree. You know, solve it in the beginning, though. I will tell you, the moving truck, I've been in a 2-year house renovation during the whole COVID. My moving truck comes in tomorrow, and the amount of decisions, even with a good set of documents, that still need to be made during the process is just staggering. So anyway, what a crazy industry. Yeah. Brian's saying architects are stuck in a lowest bid situation. If you're only requesting a 2D coordinated set, architects must stay competitive in pricing. I agree. I think that's one of the major issues that we're facing in terms of how to pay architects to create the kind of models that are needed for scheduling, pricing, all those sort of things. And somebody had mentioned about bringing insurance executives on the seminar series. Might be an interesting option. I would like to hear their point of view. And if all have heard, you know.
Sorry, I'm not sure if we skipped over a question from David. Does the trade model become the design model when it is approved for construction?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Are you saying the VDC, I guess he's suggesting the VDC model with the trade information becomes the design model. I don't know that it does simply from the legal standpoint of stamping. I mean, you still have to, some architect has to seal that information. If the architect is willing to seal it, then I guess it does become the construction model.
I think maybe there, the comment is about once we get to construction and the trades start adding more detail to that. For example, they'll take a lot of the MEP elements will go from an LOD 300 to 350, where you put in all the hangers and flanges and all that kind of stuff, and that's necessary to actually build the project. So I think usually what happens is the trade model becomes the model that the project will be built from, but the design model or the design drawings that are stamped, as Rick points out, the ones that are stamped are the ones that are the contract. Okay, so I think the issue comes down to something like if the trades find out that a duct size needs or duct shape needs to be changed, then the trade can't just change the size. They have to go back to the engineer, and the engineer has to figure out if that duct will still work.
Yeah, a lot of good comments coming in.
Yeah. See, I think we are at the top of the hour.
Yeah, and the point about VDC becoming a crutch, displacing a lot of the QC, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with the where VDC will or BIM will automate certain things like connecting walls when they get close to each other or that sort of thing. And maybe that's not what you want. And maybe you wind up depending on that sort of thing. It's almost like, you know, if you're using Word, it automatically capitalizes the I. But if you use something like Skype or WhatsApp, it won't capitalize the I. So you wind up with a lot of poor grammar because you're depending on this automation. And that can happen in modeling as well. You depend on the automation to make things right. And then it doesn't.
Okay. All right. Great comments. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for the good comments. I think they were all pretty insightful. So thank you. I hope you'll join us at the next presentation with Brian and Alex. I think it should be good. I think you can ask them a lot more very specific questions about the current VDC process and what they're seeing out there. But thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Rick. And everybody, the recording will be made available on the Building Smart USA website. We will also be sending it out if you're subscribed to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.